So hi everyone. What's that?
I said hello.
Hello. Hello back. So Jamal was going to do the introductions, but he was held up by a joyful event. So the honor is mine. We're very happy to have Beth Hochman here, who is a surgeon at the Columbia Hospital in New York. So unlike most of us, she's a real doctor. And she accepted a senior role in the emergency response team apparently in January 2020, just before the pandemic hit. And last 2 years, she has had a lot of experience with emergencies at the hospital. And she'll talk about the logistics, scheduling, and all kinds of different problems that arise at the hospital.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so like Akshay just mentioned, I've had a wealth of experience, whether it was something I wanted or not, in operations research that is akin to problems that you all find interesting, different than the operations I usually do. So just a little, oops, here we go. Just a little brief, why can't I get this to change? There we go. Before I launch into my conversation, I don't know if this is a phenomenon that is happening outside of medical centers, but at our medical center at least, any lecture we give, we are including a slide of humility, a statement of humility, the idea being that we as educators really want to encourage an environment of education and safety. We want people to feel comfortable to talk and feel included, and so and I'm certainly very much still learning about the things that I do that I shouldn't do or say. So if there's anything that I do or say or have posted in my slides that make you uncomfortable or is just off or whatever, please let me know, call me out at real time, tell me afterwards, email me or email my my supervisors. That's a really long link. I'll share it somehow in another format so that you have the opportunity if you need. Anyway, so what I hope to squeeze into this hour, but I may not have time to get through all of it, is first just a little more explanation on who I am and why I should have anything of interest to say to you, and then I'm going to talk about. Hey, come on in.
Zoom is muted, so people are saying they can't hear it.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I'm also trying to speak.
Can you hear me? Well, I don't know. Do you have people in another room who could tell us if they can hear us now?
I
Or
can
maybe
go
somebody
and
put a
check
little thumbs up on your little
right now.
on your little thing.
Yeah.
We got a thumbs up. Okay, good. Fixed. I didn't say anything super interesting before now, but for anybody who, just in case, what I started with is please let me know if I say anything wrong, off color, off putting, whatever. Let me know real time or later, or reach other people. Tell Akshay so that I can learn and be better. And feel free to jump in and ask questions at any moment if you feel so moved. So I'm going to talk about who I am. I'm going to try to get through some of the biggest problems that I see from an operations standpoint, and also how each of these problems was present before COVID, impacted by COVID, and what it looks like now, and then some of the things that we've done to try to tackle them, whether those things are effective or not. So what's my deal? Who am I? So as Akshay mentioned, I'm a surgeon. Specifically, I'm a general surgeon. I'm an acute care surgeon. What that means is that I spent a long time training. So I did training in general surgery, learning how to operate on everything from here to the ground. And then I spent a couple years focusing on trauma and critical care. So I spent a year learning how to do surgical critical care and a year of trauma. And so as a consequence, some things that I find particularly interesting really mesh well with operations research types of questions, because especially in the trauma and critical care realm, a lot of what we do in that specialty is in those specialties is coordinating crazy multidimensional systems and managing care for patients who have lots of different problems and therefore require lots of different interventions by different people, and also triaging at all times, by priority, who is the sickest, who most urgently needs what, when. And then within a given patient, which injury or which problem needs the most urgent intervention, how and when. And so systems questions have long been something that, that I am thinking about, because it impacts everything I do on a daily basis. So I specialize in critical care, trauma, and emergency surgery. So I specifically specialize in unplanned things from a surgical environment. And then just to give you a sense of where I work, so I am part of Columbia University. I work at Columbia, or the hospital that's affiliated with Columbia. But my hospital is part of a much bigger enterprise called NYP, New York Presbyterian. And you should recognize the insignia on the other side of on the right side of the screen here, because that's your insignia. Columbia and Cornell are sister institutions, sister hospitals that are managed by New York Presbyterian. So my colleagues at Cornell, I work with my colleagues at Cornell all the time, and many of us trained, at one institution and now work at the other. So there's a lot of crosstalk between our hospitals and our institutions. And then just for those of you, in case you're not familiar with a map of New York, where the Columbia hospitals are on the upper west side, called Washington Heights, and the Cornell hospitals are on the east side, in Upper East Side specifically. But NYP actually includes 10 hospitals, and so Cornell tends to work a lot with the other hospitals that are among those 10 that are on the eastern portion of our geography, and Cornell tends to work more with the other hospitals that are on the western portion of our geography. But again, there's a lot of crosstalk and patients moving around between both facilities. So this is what my hospital, the main hospital, Milstein, looks like. That's where I work. That's the GW Bridge. And it's a lot like Grey's Anatomy. There's a lot of very attractive people walking around in very clean hallways and gossiping in a casual manner. And then, very casually operating together with cute hats. By the way, these are all pictures of my trainees from the last couple of years, and this gentleman here is a former trainee, now one of my partners. But in reality, actually, it's not at all like that. It's much more like Scrubs. There's a lot of joking around and a lot of wasted time. So a lot of sitting around trying to figure out why our system is not as efficient as it could be in many ways. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with the expression "time is money." That remains true in my job, but also for me, time to me is our ability to provide care. So it is health and well-being. It is life. So time and efficiency are really, really important concepts in my line of work. So now I'm going to launch into the first of several problems that I want to describe to you that I deal with all the time. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, my specialty is in unplanned surgeries. And so that comes in the realm of trauma or non-trauma but unplanned, like appendicitis, for example. That's one of our most common surgeries. You don't plan to get appendicitis, but it happens, and then most people undergo surgery for that. The big question that has come into play and what has impacted me directly as a consequence is, how do we schedule the unscheduled? How do we account for, in our operating room schedule, the fact that we know unplanned cases are going to come in, and organize the entire OR around that? So to give you a little bit more detail, there's a whole bunch of elective cases, elective meaning planned surgeries. So if somebody, for example, is planning on getting their knee replaced, that's, they know in advance, what they've been worked up by their surgeon, they know what the problem is, and they're scheduling the date for surgery. So the bulk of the surgeries that we do are planned elective cases, we meaning my hospital, but there are, and those cases are scheduled anywhere from 1 to 14 days ahead of time, meaning if you were to walk in, to your surgeon's office, you might be scheduling a surgery for tomorrow, or you might be scheduling a surgery for 2 weeks from now, or sometimes longer than that, and that all depends on exactly the nature of the surgical problem you have, and the urgency of it. There's many different specialties within surgery. So I mentioned I'm general surgeon. I generally operate in this region from here to here. Sometimes I dabble a little higher and a little lower. There are other specialty surgeons that work specifically on chest problems, specifically neck problems, etc., bone problems, as I mentioned, in knee replacement. So there's many different categories of surgery that we are booking cases into. And each of those categories has its own so-called block time. And then also each of those categories, many of them have specialized equipment that can only use very specific operating rooms, because those rooms are the only ones of a subset. You know, those subset of rooms are the only ones that have the certain equipment that they need. And then there's also special nursing and special anesthesia training that goes into specific types of surgery. So these are all questions that I'll dive into, or constraints that I'll dive into a little bit more in problem number 2, but just to give you a background or like general understanding of the types of constraints that we're talking about, just to start with. So elective cases are all booked in advance more or less. We know the elective schedule a day before surgery. But nevertheless, things happen. Sometimes patients, elective patients, show up late, or they cancel their surgery at the last second. Sometimes our cases take longer than we expected. In fact, they always do, because surgeons historically are horrific at time management and understanding what time it is. This is why I will most likely go over, or I won't get to all of the things that I want to talk about today. So we're terrible at time. And so now enter, that's what we were starting with. That's like the planned scene. And now we have all these unplanned cases all the time, whether it's a trauma or some other spontaneous implosion that somebody might have inside their body. So the question that I was dealing with and continue to deal with as an acute care surgeon is, when do I get to operate? When do I get to squeeze my patients in? And generally what I've had to do, and what my group has had to do, is as our patients are rolling in through the emergency room or developing surgical problems in the hospital, we are constantly just trying to like squeeze our patients into whatever space might happen to be open. If a room happens to be empty, at this moment I'll try to shove my patient into there, or I might have to bump somebody, meaning a scheduled case that's supposed to occur now is going to have to wait because I've said that my patient's problem is super urgent and needs to be done now. So in either of those circumstances, you can imagine if I squeeze into a room that happens to be free at this moment, I'm going to delay what was supposed to be in there. And if I bump somebody, I'm going to delay what they're doing. In fact, I have to call for permission to bump them, which is an interesting process in and of itself. Or I have to wait till all the elective cases are done, which means I'm going to be operating overtime, late tonight. It used to be a running joke that my block time starts at 7 p.m. Every night, because that was when I was likely going to start doing whatever cases I needed to do. And then the last option is, well, if the surgery is not super urgent, we'll just let them sit in the hospital and wait for a few days until we actually have an opening in the OR schedule, and we'll get them scheduled in a pseudo-elective fashion. And so prior to 2019, actually leading into COVID even, my group largely ended up doing all of this, and largely ended up landing on number 4, which meant our patients sat in the hospital for what we believe to be an excessive amount of time, waiting for an operating room to be available. And from a patient standpoint, you can imagine how annoying, more than annoying, that is. I can't tell you how many times I got yelled at by my patients appropriately because I couldn't operate on them fast enough. They couldn't believe they had to sit here yet another day. They're not allowed to eat because they're waiting for surgery, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a really bane of my existence, actually. It was trying to figure out when I'm going to get into the operating room. And so, what we wanted to do was figure out something practical that could alleviate this bottlenecking. And again, just to give it sort of a very basic overview of the problem, or quantify the problem. What we looked at, or what I looked at, was I gathered information on our two most common and very basic surgeries, appendectomy and cholecystectomy, meaning removing the appendix or removing the gallbladder. Those are two most common problems that we see on our service. And they're very straightforward surgeries from our perspective, and they're surgeries for which people can go home the same day of surgery, as long as they're feeling well enough. And so what I did was I gathered data on how long our patients are sitting around in the hospital, what their length of stay, LOS, what their length of stay is, and anything above this green line, which is more than 1 day, is not time that they should be in the hospital. So this is wasted time on the patient's part. And then, one of the downstream effects that became far more apparent during COVID was every moment that this person is wasting, or these people are wasting spending in the hospital, is a hospital bed that's now being blocked for somebody who needs it for some other problem, COVID, for example. And that is a tremendous amount. Every bed counts, and every resource counts. And so this was terrible for patient experience, but also terrible for other patient experience. Patients backing up in the ED, waiting to get in. So I used this argument to say, I can't do much about the unexpected cases that require super specialty stuff. I can't do much about moving them around or come up with something super creative there. But the kinds of cases that I do that are straightforward and don't require specialty equipment, and you can literally just throw me into any room with any nurse and I'll figure out how to do what I need to do, there surely must be a relatively simple solution. And so what we came up with was something called the HOV lane, which, if any of you drive on 95, that should be a familiar concept. It's the express lane. And what we did was we said, you know what, we are just going to actually block off this room. We're not going to try to fill it automatically with elective cases. We're going to say room 8 henceforth is always going to be empty, so that we can plan for the unplanned and allow that room to then absorb the brunt of whenever these unplanned cases come in. And as I said, appendices and gallbladders are our most common surgery. We have many others as well. But I was able to gather data enough to show that we have enough of those even to fill a room in a meaningful way, and then therefore treat our patients more quickly, have us not working overtime, which also means nursing staff and anesthesia staff working overtime, and decreased length of stay for patients, which means the hospital is available for other patients. So as I mentioned, we did this specifically with a focus on the straightforward, understanding that this is intended for relatively straightforward cases that are not requiring super specialized room or supplies. And then, of course, we have, within my service, I also have emergencies that come in, traumas and non-traumas, but more emergent problems. And so the idea behind the HOV room was not only are we keeping it open, but we expect that there's going to be changes, throughout the day. Like something unexpected might come in that might I'll bump myself, but that's okay. So we actually finally implemented HOV in August 2020. And just to remind you of the timeline here, we had our plan in mind and we intended to implement it in spring 2020, but spring 2020 some things changed, and COVID kind of blocked us from doing anything we want, and pretty much anything. And so that's why we didn't implement the HOV until August 2020. And what we have experienced as a consequence, though, since then, between August and now, is we very clearly have done far more cases, is that the right grammar? Many more cases during normal hours instead of off hours or on the weekends, which there's always stuff on the weekends. Our inpatient census on my service is way lower. It's half of what it was prior to COVID, and also the length of stay is definitely shorter, especially for the cases like gallbladder and appendix. Our patients are going home the same day or the next day, instead of staying for as long as 5 days, 6 days. It was not uncommon previously for those patients to sit around for 5 or 6 days, which is just really not acceptable. And people are definitely subjectively, I can say feeling happier. And not only are patients happier, I haven't been yelled at by a patient in a really long time for that specific problem, but also the staff is happier. We're getting, we're getting our cases done quickly and within normal hours, and my colleagues are happier because they're not here late or not staying at work, super late every night anymore. They're actually able to do what they're here to do. What's really interesting and confusing, though, and makes it difficult to actually really quantify the impact of what this has done between August and now is that the second wave of COVID came along, and so one could argue that our inpatient census might be a little bit lower now because we just maybe we don't have as many surgical patients as we did before, or if you were to average over the course of the year, certainly during the second surge, or what we experienced as our second surge, we had, again, more COVID patients, more medicine patients. So how exactly do we account for that? And then similarly, in terms of the absolute volume of cases, the absolute number of cases, I don't actually know how to appropriately compare what in the last year, the number of cases that we did compared to the year before that, when you account for everything was shut down for large chunks of time and then also was slowed down for large chunks of time purposefully in order to accommodate space for COVID patients. So quantifying exactly what the impact is, I think, is really challenging, and I'm looking for suggestions and help on that. But hopefully.
So, do you mind questions now,
Yeah.
or do you want us to wait?
Yeah, no, go for it.
So, how did you come to the conclusion that one room was the right number, 101?
So, as I was saying before, what I tried to focus on the cases that we knew would be relatively predictably going to come into our into the door. So appendix and gallbladder I focused on, and specifically I also focused on those because they were low volume or low complexity and likely to go home the next day. So kind of met all the things that we were hoping to achieve, that meet lots of goals. And so I quantified over the 2018, over a discrete period of time, 3 months in 2018, exactly how many of those cases we did over that period of time, and showed that the number of cases was enough to fill, like if we were to continue to have that volume, we would have easily 3 or 4 cases a day to go into the HOV room every day. So it was that was pure just adding up the numbers from 2018. Yep, no problem. Anyway, so other things that are a bit confusing or certainly are impacted by the COVID environment are now more than ever, even though we're done, we've had our first wave, we had our second wave, we had our third wave. I hope we're done with our waves. So, that part is at bay. But the aftermath of COVID, for our institution at least, but I think this is true, nationally, if not internationally, is there's a tremendous staffing shortage everywhere. So anything that we can do to be more efficient and minimize overtime and also decrease length of stay continues to be incredibly important, not for COVID, but for general care in the hospital, at large. And so all of these things remain really even more important than they were before. They always were important, but now they feel even more critical than they had been before. So these, questions of efficiency, and specifically OR efficiency, are even higher in hospital administrators' minds than they had been before. And then from a satisfaction standpoint as well, are trying to stave off people leaving is contingent upon people being happy in their job. So maintaining staff satisfaction is also an important component that I think is not often overlooked, but an important detail. And these are all things that I think are a bit difficult to quantify for different reasons. But especially because there was such variation in the last year that I think we can't really know the impact of HOV until another year goes by, and then we can really truly compare, how things look next year to how they looked pre-COVID. One other extra fun little detail that happened for us is that our entire electronic medical record system changed February 2020. which was a convenient, and by that I'm being wildly sarcastic, time for our entire system to completely change, which means that all of our sources of data completely changed, and we're still learning how to get stuff from our system. Because if you remember that image that I showed earlier of how many hospitals are in NYP, over the entire year from February 2020 to actually longer than that, until a month ago, a month ago, we were systematically rolling out this change to every one of the hospitals. So only now do we finally have an opportunity to actually go back and start learning how we can gather data from the system. So these are some of the challenges we're facing in that regard. And so my questions for you all, aside from the ones that I've already mentioned, are, I want to know, does HOV actually effectively minimize disruption to the schedule? Does it actually improve our efficiency? And is this actually the best model? Is there a better model that we could create? And then, ultimately, if this, is the best model, is this the best way to use it? Is there a better way that we should be organizing how we fill the space? Also understanding that there are other parts of the system that we work in that impact how efficient we can be. And so I'm hoping that Akhtai and Jamal and maybe another colleague can help me answer these questions as I'm starting to get my hands on the data that is finally bubbling up through our electronic system that changed. And then, as I alluded to, there are lots of other systems or lots of other variables at play that can dramatically impact our efficiency. Even if we had the most perfect schedule or the most perfect model for how to deal with unplanned cases from a scheduling standpoint, there's all these other variables that include the other staff that are in the room. What's their schedule? How are they available? There are patient transport delays, like did the patients actually get from the ER to the preoperative space in a reasonable time, and why did they, or why didn't they? The turnaround time between cases is also, there are a lot of different variables that impact that, and so that can, if the turnaround time is long for some reason, that can totally disrupt what we're able to do. And then PACU holds, which is another problem unto itself that I will explain a little bit later, but basically, in a nutshell, if the recovery PACU is post-anesthesia care unit, I also want to point out, I use a lot of acronyms, and I also have a lot of medical jargon, obviously, and I have completely lost any sense of what is normal and what is not. So if there's something that doesn't make sense, it's definitely not you, it's me. So let me know if it makes sense, if something doesn't make sense, or if I'm using an acronym that I shouldn't. It's largely out of laziness on my part. So PACU is post-anesthesia care unit, which is the recovery room. And so if there's not space in the recovery room or not staff to staff the recovery room, then you're stuck in the OR waiting until there is. That's what a PACU hold is. So, yep.
So before you move on, there was a question in the chat. For the HOV room, they were asking if you set aside staff as well.
Yes.
Do the rooms come with
Yes,
staff?
yeah. So part of the deal was we set aside, there's an anesthesiologist assigned to the room for the whole day. There's staff assigned to the room for the whole day, but only during standard working hours, not overtime. And then we, the surgical team, are always around. Cool. Were there other questions? Sorry, I totally didn't notice the chat. Let me just pop this up.
I think that's it. Actually.
Okay. Are there any questions or issues?
That's
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Just so you're aware of time, you have 20 more minutes because he didn't tell you the right time.
Oh. Okay. Cool. All right. Perfect. I'm used to this. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to fly through. I basically have already, I'm not going to waste your time with me talking about problem 2 because I've basically already talked about it. It's the approach to scheduling elective stuff. I described some of the variables. They're all the same variables that impact unplanned cases, but it's just thinking about it in a different way. Now, how do we, we've already taken the whole unplanned surgical cases problem out of the mix. Now let's focus on the other rooms. How would you schedule them better and more efficiently than they've been scheduled now? This is what Frank Curtis and Carmel Shahade helped me with most recently, or started to help me with, in terms of trying to see if using SP or DRO, here I go with acronyms that I don't even understand, stochastic programming and distributionally robust optimization. Yes, I got it. We're trying to see if we can use, what kind of algorithms can we use to actually model with the data that with the multiple different constraints that I've already mentioned, and then some. How can we use a model to generate a schedule that assigns an anesthesiologist to a case to a room, and orders the cases in a way that is most efficient. So that was that question, very similar to HOV, but different category of patient. Cool. I'm flying through this one just because I want to make sure I have time to talk about other ones, but we can come back to this in a bit if y'all want. The big thing with, ultimately for either of these problems, especially for elective cases, the elective case scheduling, is that, ultimately you are still, even if we can come up with an algorithm that generates a schedule that is ideal, it still has to work with people like me that don't understand most of this stuff. So you still have to use something that just has a giant red button. Generate the schedule, and there it is, and also something that is continuously refreshable throughout the day, since stuff continues to change throughout the day. Okay, so this brings me to the pack you hold question, which is, as I mentioned before, directly related to or significantly impacts anything that we do in the OR. We can have a perfect schedule, we can have a perfect model, but it all gets blown apart if you don't have the space or the staff to receive the schedule, receive the output of this beautiful schedule that you've created. And so, basically I think of all of this as like a giant Tetris game, because we're constantly trying to figure out, okay, well, I need to know in advance what is the destination that the person is going to need, and that's determined by their level of care, their acuity. I need to know, is that destination available, and what impacts the availability. That is heavily impacted by other patient movement through the hospital. So, and I'll explain that in a moment. Actually, it's directly related to unplanned things. So as patients are coming in through the ED, they are vying for inpatient beds, the same inpatient beds that our surgical patients are going to need. And then the recovery room is this intermediate space where the surgical patients basically hang out for a few hours after surgery until they can make it to their inpatient room. But whether that inpatient room is available depends on whether an ED patient came in and swooped it out of them away, and is no longer available. And also depends on whether the patients that we already had in the hospital on our service, did they actually leave when I thought they were going to leave? Or did they get sicker when I thought they were going to get better, and now they're occupying a specific type of bed that's not available or is limited in number. And so we're always trying to titrate and preemptively determine, if we can, what level of care is a patient going to need? Is that level of care going to be available when we need it? And are there staff to actually care for them in that level of care? And the reason why this particular problem became very near and dear to my heart in the last 2 years is because, as Akshay mentioned, just before the pandemic, I joined the hospital's disaster preparedness team. And because I'm of my training in trauma and critical care, my role, it was determined that I would be, if some crazy thing happened, that would never happen, but if something crazy happened, I would be the triage person. And so I became the triage person, meaning that every ICU level patient, every critically ill patient that was coming through our hospital and our smaller hospital, the two Columbia hospitals that I had circled, I was being asked, the initial clinicians were seeing them and evaluating them, but then I was figuring out where they were going to go. And the reason why that's super relevant, or was particularly challenging during COVID, was because we had to dramatically increase the amount of intensive care unit capacity that we had. The pink line here represents what our normal maximum ICU capacity is. And you'll see, I'm gonna go over here. We went from a normal of 117 at our main hospital, Milstein ICU beds, to 289, which meant we were literally like tucking patients into corners and creating ICU teams. Like, we turned spaces into ICUs that aren't normally ICUs. We turned clinicians who are not normally ICU clinicians into ICU clinicians, and then we guided them, and I specifically figured out which patient had to go where in order to get the type of care that they needed, based on what was available. And so I got very used to playing this Tetris game for a long time, and I gathered a lot of data on how I made these decisions, and the people that were working with me that were helping me, how we made these decisions of triage, which effectively then allowed us to have throughput in the hospital, which then allowed us during the second wave, which was this situation here, to stay within our capacity, more or less, and titrate our OR. We titrated our OR cases based on what our ICU bed availability was. And it was a constant, everyday conversation with 20 different people to figure out what we should do, what cases we should cancel, what we should allow to happen, and what kinds of cases we should allow to happen. And then we did it all again during the third wave. But every time we did it, we created, during this debriefing pre-planning phase between Surge 1 and Surge 2, I tried to write down all of the variables and the rules that we used to try to triage, to organize people, how we decided where people should go. And then similarly, the OR, there was also an algorithm that they were trying to use, or that people were trying to, rules that they were trying to use as a guiding force of priority. And the big question that I have for you all is, how do we translate that into something so that it's not me sitting in a giant console and getting a bazillion phone calls from everybody to coordinate? Can we turn that into something more automated? Maybe it's not possible to make it totally automated, but something that can be a little bit more streamlined and also truly objective, right? So, I remain human, and so I'm sure there are decisions that I made that were not right, and especially when you're dealing with a major crisis, every one decision. I think I've mentioned this to other people before, especially during Surge 1.0. I basically didn't sleep for a couple of months, and the reason that I was really wide awake and super wired is because I felt like every phone call and every decision I made was 10 people's lives, either up or down. And so the stress of the moment and the acuity of it was I can't stop because it's people are going to die if I stop. And so that required a lot of energy, and that kept us going then. But that's not those kinds of decisions are continue to be occurring, every day. But fortunately, we have a little bit more time and space and brain power to now think about it and turn it into something, or use a system that can be more objective and less subjective. Anyway, just to give you a sense again of our case, why does the destination availability make a difference? What does ICU have to do with the OR? Just to give a sense here, so this again is our ICU relative ICU occupancy, and this is our surgical. The blue line is our surgical case volume. So Surge 1.0, our surgical case volume went basically to 0. That was purposeful. So only absolute emergencies happened, and then it took us quite a while. And in fact, this is only through the end of Surge 2.0. But we had not made it back to normal surgical volume because we still had our ICU was still quite full. So we couldn't get people, we couldn't do more surgeries yet. So this represents that was all lost opportunity in surgical case volume because of how the rest of throughput in the hospital impacts what we can do in the operating room. So So my next question to everybody is actually multifold, focused specifically on the PACU. It is how do we minimize these PACU holds? How do we figure out how can we optimize patient flow through the surgical floors so that we can coordinate patients coming out of the OR into the recovery room and then being able to move from the recovery room to their next destination in a fluid manner instead of getting these bottlenecks that then either shut the OR down altogether or have people sitting in the OR waiting for hours just for bed availability. And the next level of that would be, instead of us always doing this reactively, which is what we do now, reactively we're like, ugh, so sorry, I'm going to have to either cancel your case or you're going to have to sit here till 10 p.m., which is frustrating for everybody. Is there a better way where we can proactively figure out these questions? Can we ascertain in advance, like, what exactly is going to be our bed availability? And so, that was, again, that's what I was doing. Like, we took a gigantic TV and put it in the middle of the table so that I could see all the things I needed to see. It was pretty ridiculous. And I created, this is what I call a bed map. This was the tool that I used to consolidate all of the information about every variable I needed to figure out where people could go, and then based on what was available where, what cases could be canceled or what needed to be canceled or what could continue. And that informed also our every day we had a different strategy of, like, today we're going to focus on getting people out of the ED to this space, and we're going to just plant people in the PACU and deal with it, and vice versa. There were many variables that I represented on here that are too tiny for you to see, but the red may or may not be obvious. That was COVID to not COVID. That was relevant also because isolation requirements impact what room is available and who can be with whom. Isolation and gender were details that you don't think of as being like, how does that impact my surgical stuff? But actually, those were details that prevented me from moving people out of PACU to their room because they needed to have the same bug or not have the same bug and have the same gender of some other room.
Quick question.
Yep.
So I was just curious, it seemed like since you had like a large dip of people not doing the elective surgeries, et cetera, I'm wondering if you could notice through the data whether when you guys got back, were the surgeries more complicated because people's conditions got worse, and that actually would affect kind of downstream
Absolutely.
impact?
Absolutely. I'm realizing I didn't include that slide in here, but there's another version of this slide where I basically, the short answer to your question is yes. There's an acronym CMI, Case Mix Index, that insurance companies use and hospital administrators use as a way of measuring how sick people are. Our Case Mix Index, CMI, this is why I use acronyms, it's just easier to say. Our CMI was way higher than it ever had been at this point. And so that was also why, even if I go back here, this is just ICU patients, but that's also why, even though we weren't doing critical surgeries, we weren't doing as many surgeries on patients that would require post-operative critical care, our ICUs were still super full of even non-COVID patients. Green is non-COVID. So even here, we were totally full, even when we only had, as our surge 2.0 was tapering down. So, and that perpetuated. There were many people, our patients definitely were sicker and more complicated, and stuck in the hospital for longer than they had been before. So really proved how important access to care is, and the impact of not having it or choosing not to go to the hospital. So yeah, that did impact. But nevertheless, from an HOV standpoint, our business has been busy, unfortunately. But we fill the HOV every day. And actually, to that point, at our smaller hospital, that's how I felt. So at our smaller hospital, I actually just negotiated for us to have an HOV starting next month, because this is another layer of the problem is our main hospital was super full, and so we were burdening the EMS transport system to like move people around. And I also was getting calls from all of our sister hospitals, please take my patient, please take my patient. And I was coordinating with Cornell, are you gonna take them or am I gonna take them? How many beds do you have today? How many do I have today? You know what I mean? Similarly, we like toggle patients around wherever operating room is available. And so we negotiated to get an HOV room started at Allen Hospital next month so that we can treat people in situ, and not only that improves their length of stay, but also not burden the length of stay and the transport system in between with all of those problems. So we'll see. That's going to be the next layer question I'm gonna dump on you, Jamal, to help me understand. Anyway, so for this one, Carmel Shahade is interested in trying to model, she's at Lehigh, trying to model a optimization approach for this broader patient flow scene, but I want all the help I can get on figuring this out. And so this also relates, that was, focusing on how does it impact PACU, but really it impacts the entire hospital, as hopefully is apparent based on what I was saying. We refer to being in surge. So as I mentioned, like hopefully, COVID, that's not in the conversation really as much anymore, but we're still in surge level 3 right now, meaning I got an email this morning that 63 people are sitting in the ER waiting for a bed. 17 have been there for more than 24 hours. And it's because they're waiting for their next destination. And the OR, I get an email every day about the PACU holds, like how long people have been waiting, to get to their, to get out of the PACU, and then I get, every so often a very angry email from somebody who's like, I was waiting in the OR forever, and like, why couldn't you, So like, I really try to avoid anger, at all costs. That's the real problem I'm trying to fix. So these are all heavily interrelated. Do I have like 1 minute left?
Sure.
Yeah?
What did you want?
Okay. So the last thing I'm just going to skip around. So basically, the way we use space also is heavily impacted, or heavily impacts how we're able to care for patients. And so, I'm going to skip through this. No. Erg. Basically, what we, as we were toggling people around, and particularly, as I mentioned, we swelled from an ICU standpoint from 117 to 289 at our peak. We had to create spaces that are not usually used for ICUs. And so instead of opening the presenter mode, which seems to be a real problem here, I'm just going to do this. So what we had to do was find what space would work well. And really, our ability to deliver care is impacted, especially in the ICU, by having an open space where you can have direct line of view of many patients at the same time. And we have a huge team, a multidisciplinary team, as I mentioned before. So you need to be able to actually, when we're rounding on patients, which means we're going and physically seeing, like that's the moment where we're talking about everything that's happening, seeing them and making a plan for the day, especially in the ICU that involves a lot of people. And so this is a picture of like kind of a standardized day in the cardiac ICU, where there's about a bazillion people standing around, and this is a HIPAA compliant. You can't see any patients here. This is all just clinicians. But there's a patient in this room over here, and all of these people are here to talk about the patient in the room. So you need a space where you can actually, like, everybody can just stand, and then to be able to communicate with each other, you need to be able to hear each other. We try to read each other's lips, but you can't really do that now when everybody's got a mask on. So the space that we use dramatically impacts our ability to deliver the care that we do. And so in terms of COVID, we kept deciding like which units are we going to use, what are we going to turn into an ICU, what's feasible, what's not, how is our daily like motions, how will our daily motions be impacted or not by the space we choose. And supply is also really important. What I learned after we turned this unit into an ICU, I learned that the zoning for oxygen is specific, and you can only have so many people on a certain number of oxygen things within a certain zone. These are problems I never thought I would have to answer or figure out. And so we were like, and then moving people around depending on their oxygen requirement, which was just not a problem I ever thought I would be faced with. But I wanted to mention this kind of problem to you, even though I'm not going into great detail, because I wanted you to just see another layer, another version of the type of systems or operations research problem that I see. And going virtual also is quite challenging. We've tried to virtually round in different ways, largely in order to augment our workforce, and then also if an ICU physician has to be quarantined because they have COVID, for example, or who knows what the next thing will be. I don't know. This may be relevant in another environment, and in fact for me it was, because I spend time working in Ethiopia, but have had to be virtual for the last 2 years, so I virtually round with them periodically, and it is a very different experience, and my ability to communicate obviously is impacted by the space that we're in. So, and this morning my colleague, I'll just wrap that up, my colleague called me to say that we're trying to figure out a different way to round that will be better, and he's pretty sure that one of the main problems is the way our ICU is currently organized is blocking us from being able to round well. And so how can we do it better? So I mentioned that to say this is not unique, space and how we are organized is not unique to COVID, but in fact, like, routinely a problem for us. All right, cool. I think, oh man, I managed to get through pretty much everything I wanted to. The last one was a boring problem, to me at least. I mean, it's not, it impacts my life, but we can talk about it another time. Cool. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
Let's thank Beth.
Thanks,
It's
guys.
the first time I actually get to see you in person.
I know. It was very exciting.
I have a very naive question about
Sure.
way back to problem one, but it may transcend the other problems, and it has to do with how you measure goodness. So, by my count, as you were telling these wonderful stories, you have providers such as yourself and the other staff that support you, and it seems to me that you have the objective to not waste time. You have patients, and they have an objective to not waste time.
Yeah.
And then you have facilities, and you want to keep the facilities busy. So how do you level all those and sort of combine them so that you have sort of a single objective that you're trying to accomplish? In other words, how do you measure goodness in this complicated
Yeah,
system?
well, I mean, my perspective on that is that's where outcomes research comes into play. So what I mean by outcomes research is, at the end of the day, we are all here to take care of patients. And so our biggest goal is to provide high quality and effective patient care, goodness, as you're saying. And so we're looking at outcomes. Are people feeling well when there's a couple different approaches to this. There's, at the hospital level, patients get sent, I think it's randomized because I don't think everybody gets it. There's a questionnaire that patients get that they fill out saying what their experience was. But then from a more, I don't know, the medical approach, what I care most about is like, but are they healthy? Are they doing well? And are they happy as a consequence? So we keep track, while there's the patient experience surveys, we're also keeping track of each different division is keeping track of their outcomes, meaning are the patients well when they came back for their follow-up visit? How are they doing? Did they have any complications during their hospitalization or after? Did they come back to the hospital within 30 days? There's a very standard, nationally hospitals are evaluated for their readmission rates. So it's something that CMS, what does CMS stand for?
Centers for Medicare and Medicaid.
Thank you. The way, a portion of our patients are paid for by Medicare, a significant portion of our patients are Medicare and Medicaid, and things that we do are, our hospital accreditation is defined by what CMS declares. So there are certain reportable outcomes that we have to declare, and then things that are surgery specific or division specific that CMS might not be dictating, or JCO, which is the Joint Commission accreditation of hospital organizations. Now it's just Joint Commission, JC. So some different entities have, and there's AHRQ, the Agency for Health Research Quality. No, Google it. But different agencies have different discrete outcomes that they want us to follow, and then different divisions also focus on their certain things. So like the oncologists want to know time of remission, et cetera. So we all have our different outcomes that we're looking at. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. Well, awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening.